The year is 1950. The dust of World War II has settled, but the adrenaline of the men who fought it has not. Across the United States, a transformation is occurring. The horse and buggy heritage is finally dead, and in its place is a hunger for speed that the world has never seen. But this isn't about the family station wagon. This is about the roar that disturbed the peace of suburban Sundays. This is about the machines that became symbols of freedom for some and symbols of menace for others. In the 1950s, a motorcycle wasn't just transportation, it was a middle finger to the status quo. Tonight, we are counting down the top 20 motorcycles that didn't just move people, they moved the soul of a nation. We'll look at the engineering marvels from Milwaukee, the precision of the British invaders, and the sleek Italian designs that began to whisper of a globalized future. Buckle your chin straps. We're going back to the era of the leather jacket, the grease-stained hands, and the wide-open road. The 1950 Indian Chief Blackhawk. We begin our countdown with a ghost. By 1950, the Indian Motorcycle Company was bleeding. Based in Springfield, Massachusetts, they were the Wigwam, the oldest rival of Harley-Davidson. Their flagship for the new decade was the Chief Blackhawk. Underneath those massive, flowing, skirted fenders, which some called art and others called excessive steel, sat the 80-cubic-inch, 1,300cc engine. This was a flathead V-twin. In an era where overhead valves were becoming the standard for performance, Indians stayed loyal to the side valve design. It was a heavy beast, weighing in at over 550 pounds. But the 1950 model brought a revolutionary change, the telescopic front fork. For decades, Indian had used the leaf spring or girder front end. The move to telescopic forks was supposed to modernize the ride, making the Chief the Cadillac of motorcycles. Imagine kicking this beast to life on a cold morning. You don't just start an Indian, you negotiate with it. You retard the spark with the left-hand twist grip. Yes, Indian put the throttle on the left back then, and you give it a mighty heave. When it catches, the sound is a low, rhythmic thumping. It doesn't scream like a modern sport bike, it breathes like a locomotive. The Blackhawk represents the end of an era. It was the last true Indian Chief before the company's original demise in 1953. For the 1950s biker, this was the ultimate long-distance cruiser. It was built for the straight, endless highways of the American West. It didn't turn well, it didn't stop fast, but on a sunset road in Arizona, there was nothing more majestic. The Harley-Davidson Model K, 1952. As the 50s progressed, a threat was emerging from across the Atlantic. British bikes from Triumph and BSA were light, fast, and nimble. Harley-Davidson's answer arrived in 1952, the Model K. The Model K was a radical departure from Milwaukee. It was a unit construction engine, meaning the engine and the transmission shared the same cases. This made it compact. It featured a 45-cubic-inch, 750cc side valve engine, but more importantly, it featured a swing arm with rear shock absorbers. For the first time, a Harley rider didn't have to rely on a sprung seat to save their spine from the potholes of Route 66. This was the sport bike of 1952. The Model K was marketed to the younger generation, the guys who wanted to go fast between stoplights rather than cruise across 3 states. It was the direct ancestor to the legendary Sportster. Without the Model K, Harley-Davidson might have become a relic of the past, stuck building tractors for old men. It proved that America could build a bike that handled. The BSA A10 Golden Flash. While Harley and Indian fought for the soul of America, the British were winning the hearts of the speed freaks. Enter the BSA A10 Golden Flash. BSA stood for Birmingham Small Arms, and they were, at one point, the largest motorcycle producer in the world. The Golden Flash, released in 1950, was a 650cc vertical twin. Unlike the American V-twins, the British twins revved higher and felt zippy. The Goldie was famous for its color, a shimmering pale gold metallic paint that stood out in a sea of black and olive drab bikes. It featured a semi-unit gearbox and was capable of over 100 miles per hour. In 1950, hitting the ton, 100 miles per hour, was the ultimate badge of honor. This bike created a divide in the 1950s motorcycle community. You were either a big twin guy, Harley, Indian, or a Beezer or trumpet guy, BSA, Triumph. The Golden Flash was reliable, it was oil-tight, by 1950 standards, and it gave the American rider a taste of European sophistication. It was the bike for the rider who cared about engineering precision over raw, vibrating torque. The Vincent Black Knight, 1954. If the Indian Chief was a locomotive and the BSA was a sports car, the Vincent Black Knight was a spaceship. Philip Vincent was a man obsessed with the future. In 1954, he introduced the Black Knight, a fully enclosed motorcycle. He believed that riders shouldn't have to get covered in road grime and oil. He wanted a gentleman's motorcycle. Underneath the futuristic fiberglass fairings was the heart of a Black Shadow, a 998cc V-twin engine that was arguably the best engine in the world at the time. The Black Knight could cruise at 100 miles per hour all day long in near silence and comfort. The motorcycling public of the 1950s hated it. They thought the fairings were effeminate or weird. They wanted to see the engine. They wanted the wind in their faces. Only 101 units were ever produced. Today, it is one of the most expensive and sought-after motorcycles in existence. But in 1954, it was a commercial disaster that signaled the end of the Vincent HRD brand. It was a bike that was right, just 30 years too early. The Triumph 6T Thunderbird, 1950. If you want to point to the exact moment the outlaw motorcycle born was born in the eyes of the public, you don't look at a Harley, you look at a Triumph, specifically the 1950 6T Thunderbird. In 1953, a film called The Wild One hit theaters. Marlon Brando played Johnny Strabler, the leader of the Black Rebels Motorcycle Club. He didn't ride an American V-twin, he rode his own personal Triumph Thunderbird. That image, the leather jacket, the tilted cap, and the parallel twin Triumph set the blueprint for cool for the next 50 years. It was rebellious, it was dangerous, and it was undeniably sexy. The Thunderbird was Edward Turner's answer to the American demand for more. The previous Speed Twin was a 500cc, but Americans wanted to go faster for longer. Turner bored the engine out to 650cc. This was a long-stroke engine, giving it a distinct, punchy torque curve. Notice the nacelle, that streamlined metal housing around the headlight and instruments. It gave the bike a clean, aerodynamic look that the bulky American bikes lacked. It was finished in Thunderbird Blue, a color that looked more like a high-end suit than a piece of machinery. The Thunderbird proved that you could be a rebel without being a grease monkey. It was the first superbike for the common man. The Harley-Davidson Hummer, 1955. Not every legendary bike of the 50s was a 1000cc monster. Some of the most important machines were the ones that put a generation of teenagers on two wheels for the first time. Enter the Harley-Davidson Hummer. Believe it or not, the Hummer wasn't an original American design. After WW2 is part of war reparations, the designs for the German DKW RT-125 were given to the Allies. The British made the BSA Bantam, the Russians made the Moskva, and Harley-Davidson made the Model 125, later dubbed the Hummer. It was a tiny 125cc two-stroke single-cylinder engine. It produced about 3 horsepower. It didn't have a battery. It used a magneto ignition system. It was basic, it was loud, and it smoked like a chimney. Why is it on this list? Because the Hummer was the gateway drug. It was affordable for a kid working a paper route. It taught a generation how to wrench, how to balance, and how to crave the wind. Without the humble Hummer, the big twin culture of the 60s and 70s wouldn't have had a customer base. It was the entry point into the American legend. The R68, 1952. While America was obsessed with chrome and the British were obsessed with style, the Germans were obsessed with precision. In 1952, BMW released a bike that redefined sport touring, the BMW R68. The R68 was BMW's first true 100-mile-per-hour production motorcycle. In the early 50s, that was a magical number. To achieve this, BMW used their signature Boxer twin engine, 600 cc's with overhead valves. But this wasn't just a standard R67. They increased the compression ratio and added larger carburetors. Riding an R68 was a gentlemanly experience compared to the vibration-heavy Harleys. The Boxer engine cylinders stuck out into the wind, providing natural cooling and a low center of gravity. It featured a plunger rear suspension, which provided a stiff but controlled ride. Only 1,452 of these were ever built. It was expensive, prohibitively so for many, but it established BMW as the brand for the connoisseur. If you rode an R68, you weren't a hoodlum. You were an engineer, a doctor, or a professional racer. It was the thinking man's speed machine. The Ariel Square 4, 1953. Innovation in the 1950s often took strange, beautiful forms. No bike illustrates this better than the Ariel Square 4, affectionately known as the Squariel. While everyone else was building singles or twins, Ariel decided to build a four-cylinder. But it wasn't an inline four like a modern Honda, it was two parallel twin engines geared together, sharing a common crankcase. Imagine four cylinders arranged in a square pattern. By 1953, the Mark II version was released featuring the iconic four-pipe exhaust system. It was 1,000 cc's of smooth, effortless power. While V-twins throbbed and vibrated, the Square 4 hummed. It was famously called the Whisperer. You could start it up and leave a nickel standing on the tank. It wouldn't fall over. It had one fatal flaw: heat. The rear two cylinders didn't get enough airflow, often leading to warped heads. But for those who could maintain them, the Ariel was the ultimate luxury tourer. It represented a peak of British mechanical ambition that would never be seen again. The Norton Manx, 1950. We cannot talk about the 1950s without talking about the racetrack. And in the 1950s, the racetrack was dominated by one name: Norton. Specifically, the 1950 Norton Manx. Before 1950, motorcycles didn't handle. They just went in the direction you pointed them and hoped for the best. Then came the featherbed frame, designed by the McCandless brothers. It was a twin-loop, all-welded frame that was so smooth to ride that racer Harold Daniel said it was like riding a featherbed. The engine was a 500 cc single-cylinder Manx. It featured double overhead cams, or DOHC, and was built for one thing: sustained high RPM punishment. At the Isle of Man TT, the most dangerous race on Earth, the Norton Manx was the king. The Manx is the reason we have café racers today. Young riders in London would buy old Nortons and try to emulate the Manx racers. It was the gold standard of chassis design. Even today, the featherbed frame is considered the blueprint for the modern sport bike. It was the bike that taught the world how to take a corner at 100 miles per hour. We are now entering the golden tier. These are the motorcycles that didn't just define the 1950s, they changed the global economy, pioneered extreme racing technology, and birthed the most famous model names still sold in showrooms today. If you ever needed proof that the 1950s was a decade of madness, look no further than Italy in 1955. While the rest of the world was struggling to make two cylinders reliable, Moto Guzzi decided to build an 8-cylinder motorcycle. Designed by Giulio Cesare Carcano, the Moto Guzzi V8, or Otto Cilindri, was a 500 cc masterpiece. Think about that: 8 cylinders squeezed into a half-liter space. Each piston was roughly the size of a large thimble. It featured dual overhead cams and 8 individual carburetors. It looked less like an engine and more like a Swiss watch built by a maniac. It produced an incredible 78 horsepower and could reach speeds of 178 miles per hour in 1955. To put that in perspective, most family cars of the era couldn't hit 80 miles per hour. To ride it, you were tucked behind a dustbin fairing, a massive aerodynamic shell that covered the front wheel. The V8 was too fast for the tires and brakes of the time. It was terrifying to ride, and the development costs nearly bankrupted the company. It only raced for 2 years before the dustbin fairings were banned for safety. It remains the most complex racing motorcycle ever built, a testament to a decade that refused to acknowledge the word impossible. The Honda C100 Super Cub, 1958. Number 10 on our list is statistically the most important vehicle ever made. Not just the most important motorcycle, the most important vehicle, period. The 1958 Honda Super Cub. Before 1958, motorcycles had a grease and leather image. They were for outlaws, enthusiasts, and mechanics. So Ichiro Honda wanted to change that. He wanted a bike for the shopkeeper, the student, and the housewife. The Super Cub featured a step-through frame, so women in skirts could ride it, a centrifugal clutch, so you didn't need to master a hand clutch, and plastic fairings to protect your clothes from oil. It was powered by a 50cc 4-stroke engine that was virtually indestructible. You meet the nicest people on a Honda. That marketing campaign destroyed the outlaw myth and brought motorcycling to the masses. Over 100 million units have been sold since. In the late 50s, this bike was the spark that ignited the Japanese motorcycle revolution, eventually putting almost every British and American manufacturer on the defensive. It was the bike that put the world on wheels. The Harley-Davidson FL Hydroglide, 1950. If you close your eyes and picture a classic Harley, you are likely picturing the 1950 FL Hydroglide. This is the bike that defined the American cruiser aesthetic. The heart of the FL was the 74 cubic inch panhead V-twin, named for its chrome valve covers that looked like upside-down cooking pans. It was smoother and cooler running than the knucklehead that came before it. The name came from the hydraulic front forks introduced a year prior. In 1950, Harley perfected the trim. This was the era of big chrome. Massive headlights, fringed leather seats, and the big twin rumble. It was heavy, stable, and built for the new interstate highways that were beginning to carve through the American landscape. The Hydroglide was the mount of choice for the returning veteran who wanted to see the country he just fought for. It wasn't about racing, it was about presence. When an FL rolled into town, you didn't just hear it, you felt it in the pavement. The Triumph Tiger T110, 1954. By the mid-50s, the speed war was at a boiling point. Triumph needed a bike that could officially claim the title of fastest production motorcycle in the world. They built the Tiger T110. The 110 stood for its top speed, 110 miles per hour. In 1954, that was astronomical for a showroom bike. It was a 650cc overhead valve twin, and it was the first Triumph to feature a rear swing arm with twin shocks, finally ditching the uncomfortable sprung hub. The T110 was the bike that racers used to set world records at the Bonneville Salt Flats. It was leaner and meaner than the Thunderbird. It was the bike for the ton-up boy, the London youth who would race from one café to another, trying to hit 100 miles per hour before a record finished playing on the jukebox. The Ducati 98, 1952. While the giants of industry were fighting with heavy steel, a small Italian company formerly known for making radio components was beginning to make noise, the Ducati 98. The 98 was Ducati's first real motorcycle, moving up from motorized bicycles. It was a lightweight 98cc overhead valve single. It was simple, but it possessed something the others didn't.
Italian anima, soul. In the 1950s, Italy held the Moto d'Italia, a grueling 1,000-mile race across public roads. The Ducati 98 dominated its class. It proved that Ducati could build engines that didn't just look like jewelry, they could survive torture. This bike laid the foundation for the high-performance desmodromic valves and trellis frames that would make Ducati the Ferrari of motorcycles in the decades to follow. This is the final stretch, the elite machines that defined the climax of the decade. These are the bikes that transformed from mere transport into cultural icons, including the birth of the most famous model name in history, and the bike that finally won the horsepower war.
The Royal Enfield Super Meteor, 1953. As we break into the top 6, we encounter the heavyweight of the British invasion. While Triumph was focused on agility, Royal Enfield went for pure displacement. Meet the 1953 Super Meteor. In the early 50s, the golden rule was 500cc or 650cc. Royal Enfield broke the rules by introducing a 700cc parallel twin. It was designed specifically for the American market, where bigger was better. It was one of the first bikes capable of maintaining 100 miles per hour with a sidecar attached. It featured a unique oil bath primary chain and a massive, sturdy frame. But its most famous feature was the neutral finder, a small lever that allowed the rider to click the bike into neutral from any gear while stopped. It was a bike built for the man who wanted British engineering but American muscle. It was the muscle car of the motorcycle world before muscle cars even existed. The Harley-Davidson Sportster, 1957. In 1957, Harley-Davidson did something that would change the company forever. They took the lessons from the Model K and the pressure from the British twins and forged a legend. They called it the Sportster. At its heart was the XL Iron Head engine, a 55 cubic inch, 883cc overhead valve V-twin. Unlike the big touring panheads, the Sportster was lean. It was all engine. It was the bike that brought hot rod culture to the motorcycle world. In '57, the Sportster was actually faster than many of the big FL models. It was the young man's Harley. It was easy to strip down, easy to bob, and it became the canvas for the first custom choppers. The Sportster has been in continuous production for nearly 70 years, but it all started here in 1957 as a desperate attempt to reclaim the youth market. The Vincent Black Lightning, 1952. If you wanted the fastest thing on two wheels in the 1950s, you didn't look to America or Japan. You looked to a small shed in Stevenage, England, the Vincent Black Lightning. The Black Lightning was a racing version of the Black Shadow. It was stripped of all non-essential parts, lights, horn, even the stand. It weighed only 380 pounds, but produced 70 horsepower. That power-to-weight ratio was terrifying. This is the bike associated with the most famous photo in motorcycling history, Rolly Free, wearing nothing but a bathing suit and sneakers, lying flat on his stomach to reduce wind resistance as he clocked 150 miles per hour at Bonneville. It was the superbike before the term was invented. It was expensive, it was temperamental, and it was the fastest production motorcycle in the world for decades. The Harley-Davidson Duo Glide, 1958. For 50 years, Harley riders had suffered with hardtail frames. The rear wheel was bolted directly to the frame. In 1958, Harley finally added a rear swing arm and shocks. Duo meant suspension on both ends. This was the birth of the full dresser. The Duo Glide allowed for the massive king of the highway seats, huge saddlebags and windshields. It transformed the motorcycle from a rebel's tool into a transcontinental traveler. It was the ultimate expression of 1950s American optimism. You could load up the bags, take your girl on the back, and ride from New York to California in relative comfort. The Triumph Bonneville T120, 1959. As the decade drew to a close, Triumph dropped a bombshell that would define the next 20 years of motorcycling. Named after the place where records were broken, the 1959 Bonneville T120. The Bonnie was the ultimate evolution of the Edward Turner twin. It featured twin carburetors and a 650cc engine that could comfortably hit 115 miles per hour. But it wasn't just about speed, it was about style. The 1959 model, with its Tangerine Dream paint scheme, looked like it was moving even when it was standing still. The Bonneville became the face of the café racer movement. It was the bike every teenager wanted and every father feared. It was the perfect bridge between the grit of the 50s and the explosion of the 60s. It remains, to this day, the most iconic British motorcycle ever built. The 1953 Indian Chief, the final original. And finally, at number 1, it isn't the fastest and it wasn't the most successful, but the 1953 Indian Chief is the most important motorcycle of the 1950s because it represents the soul of the American road at the moment it was almost lost. 1953 was the year the original Indian Motorcycle Company went bankrupt. The Chief was their masterpiece, a bike with lines so beautiful they are still copied by every cruiser manufacturer today. It was the last of the Mohicans. The 53 Chief represents the crossroads of the 1950s. It was the battle between the old world, Indian, and the new world, Harley and the British. When the last Chief rolled off the Springfield line, an era of American history ended. It is the most coveted collector's bike of the decade because it captures the spirit of the 50s: chrome, ambition, rebellion, and a touch of heartbreak. The epilogue. The road ahead. The 1950s began with soldiers returning home and ended with a global industry transformed. From the hum of the Honda Super Cub to the thunder of the Vincent Black Lightning, these 20 machines did more than just transport us. They defined our identity. They gave us the ton-up boys, the outlaws, and the tourers. The road continues, but the echoes of the 1950s will always be heard in every twist of a throttle. Thanks for riding with us.